So good evening, everybody. I'm Andrew Johnston. I'm the director of the UVA program in Historic Preservation. And tonight we have the long delayed, we'd planned this for the COVID semester, so here 3 years later, we are very happy to welcome Erich Theophile, who's co-founder and executive director of the Kathmandu Valley Preservation Trust and principal of Erich Theophile. His talk tonight is Nepal's Kathmandu Valley, Architecture, Advocacy, and the 2015 Earthquake. This lecture tonight is supported by the Hanbury Endowment. We have 3 people with us tonight associated with Hanbury: Mike Evans, class of 72, Nick Valatis, and Jane Rathbone. So thank you, folks. I also want to give thanks to Will Rourke and the Scholars Lab Library for organizing this. Erich Theophile studied visual and environmental studies in architecture. He co-founded the Kathmandu Valley Preservation Trust in 1990 after moving to Nepal in 1987. The Kathmandu Valley in Nepal is home to some of Asia's most extraordinary historic townscapes and architectural monuments, and was named a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1986. KVPT is an American charity come to be recognized as Nepal's lead conservation agency. Over the last 30 years, KVPT has restored more than 80 historic buildings and published books. Are actually extremely gorgeous, and I have a nice collection in my HB library. Working closely with architect and historian Niels Gutschau. Most recently, the Trust spearheaded a uniquely successful involving hundreds of craftsmen, donors, and experts, both to rebuild the Patan Royal Square and Palace Complex, Nepal's most significant and visited urban space. Mr. Theophile also worked as preservation consultant for the Federal Republic of Germany, the Austrian government, and German technical cooperation. As well, Erich restarted his family's decorative hardware. Balances his time between New York and Nepal. In 2006, Erich established the Nepal Architecture Harvard's Francis Loeb Library, and in 2014 created Nepal's first museum of the Patan Palace Complex. So please welcome with me Erich Theophile.
Well, Andy told you the whole story, I guess. I'm really thrilled to be here. Paul doesn't feel very far away from Charlottesville today. I've been hanging out with Will looking at Tibetan images. I've been in this other World Heritage Site. This is the other World Heritage Site I live in, but I woke up this morning in the Academical Village feeling that we're all connected. We're all here because we love historic buildings. On that note, let me tell you that in 1987, this is the place I arrived. My professor at college, Edward Sackler, had said, "Go to the Patan Durbar Square in the late afternoon. The facades of the palaces will be covered in Western light." He was hoping that I would fall in love with the place as he had in the 70s. And I guess, knocked out. 35 years later, we're still going back to that square. That square is an urban crossing. We're looking north. Those are the high mountains, that white band in the distance. The bus is crossing the east-west axis. This crossroads has been active since the time of Christ. And what we're looking at is really the build-out the aggrandizement of this crossing by the Mala kings in the 14th through 18th centuries. There are pieces of that early crossing, like a stepwell at the far end of the square that we'll see later, that preserve 4th century inscriptions. But really what we're seeing is how ambitious the Newar kings were. They built up these little city-states. Same square seen from above. They built up 3 cities in the Kathmandu Valley, which I would tell you tonight are really the seat of an urban civilization. So rich, you won't believe what I'm going to show you tonight. I mean, look at this square. We see the string of royal palaces to the right, 1, 2, 3 courtyards. It's up over 4 centuries. We see a kind of parking lot, temples offered by subsequent kings. We see the royal garden to the right. We'll talk more about that later. Oops, sorry. Looking for my pointer. There we go. This was our first Kathmandu Valley Preservation Trust office, also my residence. Supervised the work, as you can see. To give you a little bit of context, Nepal's 500 miles long, this length, and the northern border is the Himalayan range. Red dot is the Kathmandu Valley. It's the only urban setting in that entire Himalayan range. It has 3 major cities. I said earlier, city-state. They were each separate kingdoms, literally within walking distance of each other. And to make the kind of Game of Thrones, Harry Potter fantasy even better, they were competing kings who built temples up in each of their royal squares to compete with their cousin at the other square. I arrived here. I studied architecture history. In college, I wrote my thesis about Beacon Hill, Boston. I wanted to understand how Beacon Hill's urban form had gotten that way. How did collective form evolve into something beautiful or picturesque or orderly? I got to this valley. This is Kathmandu in 1840. Kind of ultimate medieval city, ringed by agricultural fields, surrounded by the valley mountains, the hills, the hill stations surrounding Kathmandu Valley. This view is a little fantastic because an English draftsman made it, so the towers look perhaps more Florentine than Nepalese, but there really was a sense of this intensity of Nepalese cities. It was a mecca for a small group of European intellectuals in the 70s. That group were the people who guided me when I arrived in the late 80s. They were architects, anthropologists, urban planners, thinkers, people who were running away from the brutalist modernism of their European homelands. Niels Gutschow, the most important person in my life, was one of those guys, the son of a German architect and planner. He came to Nepal in the 70s to find something else, in his words. This is the same view of that Patan Royal Square that we opened with. I like to pause here because I think I don't really know a better townscape image from anywhere in the world. You know, it's just so rich. It's, you know, for me, the guy trying to understand how Beacon Hill got that way, when I got here, I thought to myself, I could spend 10 years. I want to understand how this place got this way. There was history to learn. You know, there were kings and priests and master builders involved in the layout of the square and the construction of these palaces. It wasn't accidental picturesque. It was a kind of historical layering that was unparalleled. You see You get your first introduction to Nepalese temples here. In the foreground, an octagonal stone temple. This is, we really think of these as Indian imports. Shikara, that means mountain, the mountainous central axis temple with a holy shrine at its center. But really what you see in this picture, it's like a pattern book for the pagoda. Newari, the language of the indigenous population, it's called Dega, D-E-G-A-H, Dega. The pagodas, which I'll call them for simplicity's sake, the pagodas come in 3 tiers, they come in 4 tiers, they come in 2 tiers. On the right here, you even see 4-tier on top of the palace range, which is a 3-story building. This little building in the back was the first temple we restored. Spoiler alert, we've restored every single building in this photograph except for this tower. That was lost in the 1934 earthquake. We'd like to do it, maybe in a couple of years. Arrived there as a volunteer to the government, supervising building guidelines in the monument zones, which is a difficult job in any country. In Nepal, it's an impossible job. 100 different assignments, not one of them turned out well. But I got to love the place. This was my first assignment. This structure had been dismantled, one very similar to it. And they thought me as an MIT architecture graduate, they thought I could just arrive on the site and figure out how to reassemble it. But when you take apart this kind of architecture, it's staggeringly complicated. The interlocking timber joinery, the amount of iconographical meaning to each piece, which has to go in a certain place. Fortunately, just at that year, 89, Niels had published his first dictionary of Newar building. That was a kind of illustrated dictionary. It became, my Strunk and White. It was my grammar to learn the Newar language of architecture. And when I say Newars, I want to talk about them. These are the Newars you see here. This is the view from our old office, by the way. You can see why it stayed so long. The Newars are an urban people. They're urban farmers, but they're also known to be some of the most artistic craftsmen, most inspired craftsmen in all of Asia. 14th century Chinese emperors called Nepalese craftsmen to their court to construct buildings. Metalwork made in this city of Patan was exported all up and down the subcontinent because they said the Nepalese, the Newars, have the best hand. There's nothing in Nepal that didn't originate in India, perhaps, because of the transcultural flows north. But this was the place that maybe the most beautiful rendition of a certain iconographic theme was created. Here you see an urban ritual. That's the chariot to the god of rain. It's a little bit like the Japanese ise. This is a ceremonial structure that's rebuilt and rebuilt each year and then dismantled. This chariot is built with bamboos. It's 7 stories tall. It has wooden wheels that are about 8-foot diameter. People get killed as it gets dragged around. It's not for tourist consumption. This is the real deal. These are the urban farmers bringing the god of rain through their city. The programming of it is extremely detailed. It has to go to a certain place at a certain time. The Newars are natural architects. They have architectural programming in their blood. They think about things in houses, in certain places, at certain times, to achieve certain results. No wonder when this chariot arrives, the monsoon begins. And that happened at least 4 years that I was there. The rain that marks the beginning of monsoon season happened the day this chariot reached that square. You even get a sense of the earliest layers of religious practice on the subcontinent, a connection of urban farmers, the harvest, the monsoon. These are Vedic connections. These are pre-Hindu, pre-Buddhist religious practices that link people to their harvest cycles, their growing cycles, the sun. This is some of the earliest religious practices that took place on the subcontinent around the time of Christ and earlier, and they live on in these rituals. A couple of years of volunteering, I thought, gee, I'd like to stay here. At the same time, Boston, my hometown, was experiencing the real estate crash, 1987, 89. There's nothing to go back to, my sole practitioner practice. I went to the American ambassador to see if I could get funding for projects similar to the funding that my German, Austrian, French, and Italian friends got from their governments. But she said, you know, Eric, I can send an American pianist to the Hotel Yak and Yeti to play Chopin, but I can't give you $1,000 for your temple roof. A little resentful, I went back to Dr. Seckler at Harvard, co-founded the Kathmandu Valley Preservation Trust, 501c3 charity, US-based. I didn't realize at the time that this was going to be actually the engine for 30 years of work. We managed to get a provision in our original founding, much by accident, that we could do projects on a turnkey basis. That's the reason we're now the lead conservation agency in Nepal. No one else ever got that permission. Everyone else has to do their projects in concert or through the government agencies, which, as you can imagine, is a real drag on the efficiency and quality of the projects. We alone, there was this great director general at the time, we hit it off and he got through the paperwork. It never happened again. Niels was by my side, encouraging us not to try to fix every temple, because there were thousands. Everyone had said Kathmandu Valley was special because the temples outnumbered the people. To focus on different new problems in preservation. If we had figured out how to repair the typical pagoda temple, the waterproofing, the dam-proof course, the timber restoration, what were other problems? What were other types of buildings? Like on the left here, one of my favorite houses, there was this whole range of neoclassical architecture, 1880 to 1950. This hybrid structure with a Newar carved window and neoclassical moldings added in 1890. Not to mention the fact that it was a privately owned house, not considered a monument in Nepal. We tried to start a historic house fund to buy houses. We looked at the color on historic buildings. Chinese travelers in the 6th century talked about the polychrome of the Nepalese wood carvings. But then most of the buildings we worked on were later and didn't have color. And then there was a cycle of ugly painting with enamel paints done in the 1970s. So we wanted to figure out what was the big question, color here. Was it a votive offering? In other words, something that we should repeat for religious merit? Or was it a piece of art that should be conserved? Or was it actually a later layer that should be removed so we could see the wood underneath? Upper right, we went to Kathmandu. Everyone said, oh, Kathmandu's lost. It's built up. Patan's where you should focus. Niels had been documenting Buddhist architecture in the capital. We identified these jewels in the midst of chaotic Kathmandu, which turned out to be not only important early buildings, we actually turned back the architecture history clock of Nepal working on them. We started this monastery building in the upper right, Itum Baha, it's called Itum Monastery. We started on it thinking it was a 13th century building, and through dendrochronology figured out that it was 9th century. Played with the questions of east, east, west. Can you actually make new carvings? Dr. Seckler said no. Niels and my Nepalese partners said, you can't put a plain piece of timber in this temple. You see, we made this demo here. Plain reproduction. The windows were historical. Corner strut was historical. I tried to argue with Dr. Seckler. I said, even if we just talk about it as a presentation issue, I don't want to present those 13th century windows with these ugly plain pieces of wood in front. We organized a symposium, we published a book. I finally got my answer. Anything you put up there is fake, as I just told Andy a few minutes ago. Sharon Sullivan, this brilliant Australian conservationist, told us. Anything you put there is fake. But what's the human difference between making those plain pieces and actually engaging the craftsmen of Nepal to make historical copies or new designs based on their ancestors' work? We in fact had descendants of the original carvers of these masterworks. So there was something of a living heritage too. We grew. We got so, let's say, confident that we adopted the entire royal palace complex to restore. This asterisk is this courtyard. In an ironic twist, by the late 2000s, this is 2006, 7, 8, American funding had evolved. Suddenly there was a source for our Kathmandu Valley Preservation Trust. It was called Ambassadors Fund for Cultural Projects. In a very, I don't know, it felt like validation. In a very validating way, we got their biggest grant to date. After 10 years of work, suddenly they came and gave us $1 million. We jumped into this vast project. The back courtyards, the back garden with this tank, original to the palace, 16th century, based on Mughal models from India to the south. We want to do a sound and light show and put a stage in the middle of this sometime in the future. We actually planned the entire museum complex, the entire palace complex, as a museum. There was one museum already, Museum of Bronze Sculpture, called the Patan Museum, that was excellent. We extended it, these 3 other structures, making it an architecture museum with everything from exhibits about different approaches to preservation, like freezing a room. We had a good room to freeze, by the way. It was an esoteric shrine that had been sealed for 150 years. People were afraid to open it because it would trigger some kind of curse or something. We opened it and we left it as we found it. Other parts of the palace, we did adaptive use renovation. We opened up floors to make a double height gallery to show our architectural drawings. Put mud floors in. Everyone said, you can't put a mud floor in a museum. And Neil said, yes, we must make people take off their shoes. We must make people feel what it is to walk on a mud floor. How can you call it a museum of Nepalese architecture if you're not walking on mud? But there was this elephant in the room. The elephant was the fact that we couldn't really address the fact that Kathmandu Valley is a seismically active zone. And there was a prohibition, long-standing, to work on any of the foundations of these buildings. 30 years of international cooperation in Nepal. No one had ever challenged this. People strengthened their buildings as we did. Upper levels, we would beef up the timber frame, tied together the masonry walls. We'd add ring beams under the roof beams, the rafters. But we weren't allowed to even look at those foundations. You see, Nepalese monument law was inherited from India, like much of its law, until very recently with a new constitution. This inheritance included a prohibition against excavation. That grew out of the Brits trying to protect dead archaeological sites in India. At Ajanta, you don't want people digging around. But here you are in a living city, in buildings with people. I mean, even my mother knows you have to strengthen the foundation in a seismic zone. So we adopted this incredible trio of pagodas. This is the Kathmandu Royal Square. First time you've seen that tonight. It's a historical view that you'll see later views in a second. We picked this trio because of its incredibly prominent siting, it's like the power corner of Kathmandu, because of the variety of pagoda architecture. 3 sizes, 3 different shapes, open arcade on 2, closed wall on a 3rd. We even thought, since this ferocious form of Shiva is the icon that people were made to swear oath to, because if you lied in front of this god, you'd be struck dead immediately. We thought, well, that's a good place to do our test project. We brought in the World Monuments Fund, we brought in local businessmen, we brought over our friend Bob Silman, the late Bob Silman, who's one of the greatest structural engineers ever. He's the guy they called to fix falling water. He's the guy who worked on Ellis Island and numerous other important historical sites, because he had this sensitivity. It wasn't like you were arguing with the engineer who wants everything. He would be forcing us to think more conservatively. Don't you really want to keep the pine timbers of the original construction, he said to me. You don't have to make it in hardwood. Let's keep it historical. One of Bob's proteges is smiling as I tell you that. That's Tim Bowden in the audience here. He's an engineer working with us on this long-term project. So it started in '99. We just got back in November from our recent mission. It's going to be my early retirement project, the way it's going. But so we looked at our 10 years of experiments in seismic strengthening. We looked at other people's. We looked at different building types. Bob's office in New York modeled the Nepal'S pagoda, the first time that had been done. This building is just go back for a minute, the one in the foreground. It's called the House of Indra, Indrapur. We're going to see more of it. Indrapur. This is your introduction to seismic strengthening. Call it the impossible dream. The only way, Bob explained to us, that you could truly make this building, this fragile, top-heavy structure, earthquake safe, was to put a new structure like this concrete frame that you see explicated in the diagram in the middle. The only way you could make this building safe was to hang it off of a new structure that could be calculated and designed and engineered to withstand the next quake. But he said that's not the point of this demonstration. The point is to say it's a process. The idea is to come to a consensus between art historians, architectural historians, builders, architects, and engineers. What is the way, how safe can we make this building but not lose the building itself? Here, we've inserted reinforced concrete beams. They go around the building to hold it against the lateral forces of an earthquake. And we do hundreds of little improvements, tying the timber framework together with concealed stainless steel brackets, making everything a little bit stronger. The government said no work on the foundation. Moreover, there was this other really weird thing that you won't believe. UNESCO in '93, when they were reprimanding Nepal for its lax enforcement of monument zone guidelines, they said, modern materials have been used in places where traditional materials should be used in the monument zones. Nepalese officials were so wounded by being included on the list of World Heritage in danger. They were so wounded that instead of kind of cleaning up their act, monitoring things a little more closely, the things we thought they would do, instead of that, they withdrew. And in a kind of resentful way, they said, well, no modern materials anywhere. When these government officials were building houses with modern materials in the same neighborhood, but they said, no modern materials. UNESCO says so. So we're like, oh my God, what are we, So Matthias Beck, the forerunner of Tim was here tonight. Matthias Beck was the volunteer in those days. Matthias had another 2 weeks on his 4-month stay to supervise the implementation of this project. Here you see Indrapur as we found it. We decided one weekend to invent what we call guerrilla preservation. Matthias designed a compromise solution, which was to do a ring beam wrapping the outer plinth of this temple. It would go around here. We gave up on trying to get the ring beams inserted under the walls, which would be the typical way, the way the Germans had done it in Nepal decades previous. And we went in on a Friday afternoon with 65 people, fencing, rebar, a lot of thermoses of tea, and we worked round the clock through the weekend so that by Monday morning, when the government offices across the street opened up, the building had a ring beam. We'd swept it up. You could almost not even tell that something had happened. But of course, word spread, and we were reprimanded. We were told, you can't do this again, Eric. If you put reinforcements in any of these other structures that you're working on, we will take away your official status to work. We were the only charity, international charity, sanctioned to work in Nepal on buildings. So we said, okay. Another few years later, all the buildings restored. Only Indrapur, this one here, you can't see the ring beam, you notice. Only Indrapur had that foundation reinforcement. The other buildings got repaired, they got reinforced, but they did not get this critical layer at the foundation. This is another one of these magnificent urban rituals. This happens to be the pole that represents the god Indra being erected in front of his temple. Forward 15 years later, the day we had always feared. This is the Patan Royal Square that we've seen from other directions. The Kathmandu Valley Preservation Trust had earned some bit of good karma. I got this phone call from Rohit Ranjakar, trio of our partnership, Niels, Rohit, and me. Rohit called me and said, I guess you've heard about the earthquake. I'm calling to tell you we finally went on our long postponed company picnic. We've been trying to get these guys to go away on a day-long picnic and barbecue and play sports on an open field for 2 years. They finally did it on the day of the earthquake. So 150 people strong, our workers, their families, their kids, they were all playing on this sunny meadow when the earthquake hit in the Kathmandu Valley. Rohit said, we lost a few roofs, we lost a few walls, but nobody was hurt and we're ready to go back and take on the battle. It was a battle. Notice that these buildings that, I'd gone to Nepal in '87 to enforce building guidelines. These were not legal, by the way, right? These were like the two-story additions that were done on a weekend by the local owner. These buildings held up incredibly well. We were actually pleased. I actually looked at these buildings with some love because for years we had thought, when there's the next big earthquake, these shoddily built, uninspected, without permitted buildings, these are all going to collapse. They're going to pancake like we saw in Syria and Turkey last week. But no, most of them held up. We thought there would be hundreds of thousands of people dead at the next big earthquake. We've had one about every 100 years. Instead, there were between 5,000 and 10,000 people dead. This is the Char Narayan. Char means fore. Narayan, another name for Vishnu. This, we're going to talk about some more. This temple, gone. Another temple, Hari Shankara. Harry, we can call it, gone. King Bhupatindra, gone. You'll know this place already because of the info about this talk. These are two of the rest houses overlooking that stepwell with the 4th century inscription I mentioned earlier. The roofs are really heavy. There's like 9 inches of mud, clay tiles, supported by timber frame alone. Temple, it withstood the earthquake. It twisted a lot. As Tim and I figured out just a few months ago, it held up because of its incredible wood frame portals. They acted as a backup frame. So this monumental temple twisted, and that decorative portal played the role of backup frames, preventing the building from collapsing. I said earlier, I like to go places and learn stuff from historical buildings. That was something to learn. And was the one place where there was an actual community. You know, we say we rescued the square. The only way you can rescue a place is to work there 25 years first. Then when something goes wrong, you're there. So our people were on the ground, and when the army came to bulldoze the site, government orders, they said, don't bulldoze it. We were the only historic site in Kathmandu Valley that wasn't bulldozed. We got every single piece of historical fabric from 6 major buildings that fell. People don't realize is you can have that human conveyor belt. Everyone loves that picture. You've got to have someplace at the end of the conveyor belt. You need so much room. But then again, you know, we were still actively working. We had the entire Patan Royal Palace precinct as our work yard. We built acres of workshop and storage areas. There were thousands of man hours just to sort, never mind to identify. Just to sort, oh, is it from this building? It has red paint, it's from that building. Is it from the upper roof? Is it the lower roof? This is the Char Narayan plinth. Niels called up. He was in Germany. I was in New York. Rohit was, if you believe this, living from his car. The aftershocks were so bad in the few weeks following the earthquake. And then there was another earthquake. Niels said to Rohit, we have to announce the reconstruction of this Char Narayan. It happened to be the oldest of the fallen temples on the square. It was also kind of the anchor in the middle of the square. Niels said, people need hope. He wrote an article that was published across European newspapers. Gods have no home. Because in addition to the personal loss, the building loss, the physical losses, the ability for Nepalese people to worship their gods is a profound thing. This amazing photograph by a New York friend of mine gathers up what I think we preservationists need to think about. He went there, and I think this picture captures what do they think is important. What's important to the Newars? Here, they had erected a temporary structure, God, Char, four-sided, four standing Vishnus, four standing images of Vishnu or Narayan. The god had fallen over. The plinth was re-erected, washed, anointed, dressed, worshipped. This was the heritage of the Newars. This is their devotional conservation. This was the goal of our architectural conservation. And I would actually argue that it's not so different. We worship these things, this picture of the same temple 4 years before the fall, intact with all its original 16th century iconographic wood carvings. This was somehow my religion. This is what I wanted to restore. So we always said, it's a hybrid approach we're doing. We respect the local craftsmen. We engage them. We let them carve. We let the carvers invent designs according to what they've learned from their ancestors. But then we're a little bit rigid. We have these Germans working with us. They're a little bit rigid. We make them put every single piece of historical fabric back, whatever the case. Timpanum. The first design for reinforcing the rebuilding of the Char Narayan temple. Now you're asking, what happened to the experiment? What happened to our Indrapur in Kathmandu? It was very, very frustrating in the days following the quake. There was no transportation. Communication was hard. He reached me on the cell phone and said, I said, how did Indrapur do? Oh my gosh, you're failing. How did Indrapur do? And he said, I can't tell, but the TV is showing pictures of buildings that fell down, and they haven't shown Indrapur left yet. I think that we may be in luck. Finally, word came from a friend, not only had Indrapur stood, it had performed amazingly. A speck of damage, maybe a little. The adjacent buildings, which we had worked on, but not done the foundation reinforcements, had more serious damage, still repairable. If you repair a building, it can do pretty well. But with that foundation, that guerrilla preservation ring beam, it did spectacularly. We had put our money on the winning horse, and I incorrectly thought that it would be easy from then on. The rebuilt portal of the Char Narayan, mixing, this is a new carving, old, new. There's a network of stainless steel behind this, holding it all together so that the building will perform well in the next earthquake. There's also a level of accomplishment here that we got these Newars who didn't think it was really right to put back broken carvings on the temple. The work went on. Donors came from all around the world. The Japanese ambassador in Nepal said, I want to support you, but no money for religious. So he said, okay, you can pay for all the scaffolding for the next 5 years. Here you see these rest houses that we've seen overlooking the Hiti, the twisted building that held up with its portal. We had the same problem with this stone building. It needed massive interventions. It had almost fallen. 4 years ago, almost my favorite picture of this whole set. I was there and I said to Dr. Sakar, I said, you know, you can't believe there's something about the square that makes it feel even better than it was before the earthquake. There was so much activity. You know, our building workshop was the most visited tourist site in Nepal for 3 years. You know, is it architecture or is it the process? We had teams of Eastern European stone conservationists and Viennese paint conservatists, and we had engineers, and we had volunteers from the States and from France, Indian friends who wanted to help out. It was so much fun. It was so engaging. It kind of captured up everything I loved about doing preservation in Nepal, because I had never studied preservation. It seemed kind of dry, not to insult you, Andy, but this was like so intellectually expansive, and Europeans are much less uptight about mixing it up when it comes to historic preservation. This is the closing story of tonight. This is how we ended up retrofitting that Charnarayan temple. Oops, sorry. Whoops. This was the proposal you saw earlier. This is what we thought, okay, we'll put in the ring beams under the walls. Even though things had gotten a little better, I told you it wasn't easy. Still 2 years after applying to do this work, we still didn't have permission. It turned out there was a stone lintel here that spanned the entire width of the facade that weighed 8,000 pounds. And Tim told me that number. We couldn't lift it without getting a crane in, and we couldn't fit a crane between that and the adjacent temple. And we didn't want to bring attention to the fact that we're doing the work without our official permit. So what do? Guerrilla preservation. We did it kind of low-key. Rohit, our Nepalese partner, is the most low-key man you've ever met, by the way. And Tim and Rohit figured out this alternative compromise, what I think now we'll call brilliant solution of putting the ring beam structure between the walls. We didn't have to prop up those stone lintels. It's easy to put something between two existing structures, and they notched it into the stone. They notched it into the wall so that it wasn't the full effect of the ring beam that you see here, but it got a lot of the way there. It somehow demonstrated what Niels kept telling us, you know, respect these Newar buildings. Don't try to stop yourself from going all the way, which is such a hard assignment when you love something and you want to make it strong, and then you realize, oh, I went too far and I shouldn't have put concrete in the sanctum of that temple. This was a really sensitive approach. It was almost reversible. Almost in the end, and ironically, made me appreciate all these people who had made our life so difficult for so many years. Like, we wouldn't have come on this solution had it not been for all those troublemakers. The work sailed on. The rest houses rebuilt. Beautiful courtyard recaptured. This space has the double height gallery for architectural drawings. I never thought we'd get it through built illegally twice, but Rohit managed it. Hadi Shankara rebuilt. You can't really understand one of these pagodas unless you rebuild it. Suddenly, you know, it repeats that exercise I told you about, all the pieces lying on the square, the MIT architect, like, I don't know. Suddenly, when you have to put it all back together, you understand everything. You also get a chance to document everything. You can take pictures of these roof struts that you can't photograph when they're in situ. These deep overhanging roofs make it very hard to photograph. Somehow the byproduct of all these projects were all these books. It said early on, he said, you know, we have to publish First one was this one, Documentation of Work to Date. That was his title, not mine. He said, you have to publish this, print 400 copies, and give it away to everybody you ever meet. I brought some tonight, by the way. We still have more, because he said, no one will believe that this kind of quality work can happen in a third world place. When I was in Nepal in November, we celebrated 33 buildings rebuilt. We celebrated hundreds of donors, hundreds of conservation workers, hundreds of friends. And I said, miracles are like love. You can't plan them, they just happen. But you can look back and try to explain them after the fact. So what was in this miracle that allowed us to save the Patan Durbar Square? I said, well, I think one, it was this American system of charity. My German friends always say, oh, Eric, you know how to do a fundraiser. American style, Matching grants, World Monuments Fund, the whole bit. And the other thing was having this global community. These European intellectuals, these Indian architects, these great people who came and worked with us from all over the world as volunteers, as professionals. The local wood carvers, this living tradition that, if they were in Japan, they'd be worshipped. In Nepal, they're barely making a daily wage until we pay them well. This is Niels, by the way. Who else I have to show you? Rohit. Oh, Rohit. Prince Harry. 501c3 American charity, global community. If you want a miracle, that's where you start. And I want to say, in the sense of global community, coming here today, which I was so excited about, it has been an amazing day living on the academical campus, experiencing this monument. I feel like we brought Nepal to this global community, and you're now part of it. Thank you so much.